Welcome, everybody. I'm Jeremy Fricke. I am the Vice President of Mission Advancement at Tri-Faith Initiative, and you are here today for Making the Familiar Strange with Abdullah. Is it Najjar or Najjar?
Najjar, yes, sir.
Najjar. On the Prophet Yusuf or the Prophet Joseph, depending on Arabic or English use. If you are intending to be here, you are in the right place. Welcome. So Making the Familiar Strange is a monthly program that we do over the noon hour to study Abrahamic scriptural stories or ideas alongside each other. And we try to switch back and forth between Jewish, Christian, Muslim community members to sort of provide their own perspectives. Maybe a new way of looking at a story or a different point of view, whether it is internal to a tradition or whether it is kind of an interfaith understanding of the story. We really want to encourage you to try to take other people's perspectives. You know, this is an opportunity to hear a new way of seeing these stories. And I'm just noticing lots of people joining. All right. So that's why we call it Making the Familiar Strange. It's many of these stories are familiar to us, but maybe we didn't look at them quite with the depth or the detail or the difference in point of view as we do in this space. And then finally, we're going to go over a couple ground rules. Because it's likely that there will be some opportunities to discuss or answer some questions or ask some questions. Please be as respectful as possible. I know we're a respectful bunch of people, but it's good to keep on the forefront of our mind. Challenge your own assumptions. You know, sometimes we have a very clear idea of what we believe a story or a concept is all about, and we can sometimes have difficulty allowing ourselves to see from other points of view that way. So speak from your own point of view as we go over today. That means, you know, don't necessarily speak on behalf of an entire community, as in, you know, most of the time, you know, you can say something like, as a Jewish person, you know, or you know, I learned this through my Christian identity, or most Muslims see it this way, right? Like, but the truth is that we are trying to help people understand that although there are things that unite us, there are things that are also very beautiful about our differences, both within communities and between communities. And be open to new perspectives today. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Abdullah, and feel free to introduce yourself a little bit. And if you have any questions and you don't feel the opportunity arise, just put them in the chat. I'll stop Abdullah at some point if I need to get those questions asked.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor being here. My name is Abdullah Najjar, relatively new to Omaha. It's been almost 2 months now. Community's been very welcoming. I've enjoyed every moment of it. I met a number of you, and I'm sure there's many of you I haven't met yet, and I hope to. But yeah, honored to be part of this session. I've briefly looked at some of the other previous episodes and from the titles, and I was like, okay, these are definitely ones that I want to watch. And some of them were ones that I wanted to present on. I'm like, all right, I can't do Moses, I can't do Abraham, I'm gonna do Joseph. So excited to be here for sure. Jeremy, thank you so much for everything. Question before I begin real quick. So I wanted to pick like the nice view behind me, but also I don't know how the video looks like. The lighting, is it better if I go where the wall's behind me, but the lighting is better? What do you guys think?
Wall would be better because your face is pretty dark because of all the light behind it.
Look at that, man. But I got you guys. Obviously the priority is this presentation. Thank you for the feedback. Better? Okay.
Much.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Okay. Let me share the screen. Let me show you guys. So just for references, Quran.com, Quran, Quran.com, and it has a number of different languages, the Arabic plus translations. So I recommend it if you're ever curious and interested. I can always give you a physical copy if you ever want one. Please feel free to request it. I mainly use digital versions. But yeah, the story of Joseph, Yusuf alayhi salam. So we believe in, as Muslims, we believe in over 100,000 prophets. God sent to different times and different places, people to be role models and to bring them scripture and teachings and to share the basic message that there's one God, be good to people, serve humanity, and so on and so forth. One of these prophets, and 25 of the over 100,000, 25 of them are mentioned in the Quran, so they're the top, they're the best. We know the stories to some detail, some more than others. Moses is in fact the prophet that's mentioned in the Quran the most. We have his story in a lot of detail. Joseph is one of them, and he has his own chapter. So the chapter Joseph, which is chapter 12 in the Quran. And there's a lot of different themes, a lot of different messages, a lot of lessons learned. I love the story, but I want to throw out a few themes, a few points, things that resonated with me, and then I'm totally open for a Q&A. You guys can ask questions and we can have discussions and debates. You guys are free to disagree with me. I'm open to it. I love it. Among the themes are family, social justice, struggle, pain, purpose, faith, patience, service, leadership, and there are plenty more. It starts, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. I will not be reading the entire chapter, the entire surah, because it would take a while, but I'm pointing out some verses. God says, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن. God is saying, sit back and relax. Let me tell you the greatest story ever told. So now this is God, right? He knows all, sees all, hears all. He's there, from, as the Bible says, the Alpha and the Omega, from the beginning and the end. He was there before there was anything, and he'll be there after we're all said and done, and after everything is said and done. And he's saying this is the greatest story ever, right? And by extension, the rest of the stories of the prophets and really the story of humanity is a miracle in and of itself. But this is the story of Joseph specifically. So he said the greatest story ever told. And some of you are into literature, into language. Not my strongest subject, but stories have they follow a pattern generally, and some people define it as exposition, the rising action, climax, falling action, or denouement. And so I encourage you, if that is your forte, that is your interest, you can definitely look at the story and see if it matches up, see how it does, and compare it to your favorite movie, your favorite play, Shakespeare, what have you. And I want to actually start by commenting on the fact that it's a story, right? The Quran is full of many different themes. There's different subjects, right? So there's those who are into knowledge. You can we built entire universities and libraries based off of different themes in the Quran. And the Quran has throughout history encouraged people to go into all the different subjects and sciences and studies. And knowledge is a theme and an essential value in our faith. And then for those who are into action and activism and change and all that, the Quran is full of that. Spirituality, knowledge, activism, law, theology, finances, marriage, family, all that. But it's interesting that out of all the many different themes, and the Quran talks about so many different things, but 1/3 of the entire Quran is made up of stories, which is interesting. So that's a huge percentage. 1/3 of the Quran is made up of stories. So, and if God created us, and the Quran is the word of God, then surely God knows us better than we know ourselves. And He chose the Quran to be 1/3 made up of stories. It tells us a lot about us as human beings. It tells us a lot about our nature. Stories are powerful. They move us. They shape us. They help us think and resonate. They do a lot. They help us see ourselves, our identity, help us find purpose. Stories teach us how to love and who to love, who to hate and how to hate, how to earn our money, how to spend our money, and so much more. So, people find their purpose, or even if not consciously, even if it isn't the front of the mind. And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. Psychology isn't any. Not that I'm an expert in any subject, but psychology is definitely not an area that I'm very knowledgeable about. But I believe that psychology says that that the movies you watch and the music you listen to and so on and so forth can affect the back of your mind, even if not the front. So even if you're not thinking about it, it could be subconscious. That has an impact on us. I'm actually a movie buff, and I love movies, and I like to analyze them, think about them, and discuss them. And many times I've gotten like, yo, Abdullah, it's just a movie. Like, just watch, just enjoy. Like, just eat your popcorn. Why are you like commenting and discussing and comparing to other movies and like, oh, that's what they're trying to say and stuff. It's just a movie, or it's just a song. I got this many times. I'm like, I listen to the radio because I'm trying to drive. I want to stay awake. Like, stop commenting on the song. Like, who cares about the lyrics? I'm just listening to it. It just sounds good. And I've always thought that I'm not here to bash anyone. I love everybody, and these are some of my friends over the years. We've had these discussions, but I've always been like, no, there's more to it. When you put millions of dollars together to make a movie, you know, when people spend hours or days or years to write that song, like there's levels to it. There's more to it. So I like to analyze these things. But yeah, if you think about it, again, the Quran is 1/3 made up of stories, including the stories of prophets and other peoples before us. They've done right, they've done wrong, so learn from them. But but stories are part of pretty much every culture, if I'm not mistaken. Every culture, every civilization, every religion. It's part of who we are as human beings. The movies and the shows, music videos, plays. You know, so if you're in Victorian England and you're watching Shakespeare, you know, not watching, but you know, yeah, going to a Shakespearean play. If you are on Netflix or you're watching a Hollywood movie, those things are very different. Movies, poems, plays, movies, shows, they're songs, they're very different, but at the crux of it, if you distill it down, it's a story. So something I'm passionate about. Also, before I move on to, you know, to the next point, I wanted to let you all know that Jay, who's become a good friend of mine, and he's the youth director at the temple. So he's my friend and colleague. He's doing an excellent job. His undergrad was in film studies, I believe, or media studies. So he was a film major, and he's currently teaching a class on Jews in the media. I've only attended the first class, and it was fantastic. He did an excellent job. Again, something I'm passionate about. If you're interested in these topics, you definitely can talk to him about it. But he has an excellent way of presenting the information on how these shows and movies affect us, and how we stereotype, and how we might be, absorbing, you know, different types of racism and misconceptions and presumptions and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a phenomenal class. Verse number 4. إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين. I want to focus on just one word out of this verse, actually, and it is word number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ya abati. It's my dear father. It's in one word, because you can say ya abi, my father, which is still nice because you're saying it's my fault. Like it's still endearing, it's still positive, it's still respectful. But yeah, abati, with that extra one letter. But you know, Arabic is quite different than English, and it's very powerful. And I'm not an expert on the language, but that extra letter makes it my dear father. So there's a lot to unpack here. But the son, who's let's say 10 at this time, 10, 11, 12, so on, or maybe younger, he has a, you know, he holds his dad in high esteem. He's respectful towards his father, and that's beautiful. And it's unfortunate that it's very, very common in my generation, in our times, that movies, to go back to movies, it's very common that it's not uncommon for a movie to have a theme of, like, you know, kid versus parent. Like the parents are made out to be the villains. They're the right. They're to, you know, make the hero's life horrible, to be the, you know, source of all unhappiness, and the purpose is to rebel against the parent. You know, I'm not saying all movies, and I'm not saying that there's no such thing as an abusive parent. I'm not saying any of those things, but the fact that it's a theme, personally, it bothers me that that's very common and not too uncommon in our culture. But yeah, he respects his father, and his father responds, قال يا بني, my dear son. So and he continues with the advice that he wants to give him. And because, you know, for the sake of time, I want to go into the details of the dream and this and that. There's just really only a few things I want to point out throughout his story, because there are, you know, online, there are a series of tens of hours on the story of Joseph. And the chapter is, you know, quite long, it's like 10 pages in the Quran. But yeah, he responds back with my dear son. So the son respects the father, and the father is very gentle and kind and respectful, merciful towards the son. And that's encouraged in our faith, to be respectful to our elders and to be merciful to our younger. And something beautiful. He wants to give him advice, and undoubtedly he is far older than him. We know that for a fact, even without knowing their exact ages. But, you know, if he has 12 sons and Joseph is second to last, so the dad definitely has years on him. So he wants to give him his advice, and his advice was completely on point. And you'll see that at the end of the story. His advice was completely on point. It's definitely something that, you know, the father was right about, and parents are, you know, usually right. Although we do believe that we're all human and that parents can make mistakes, but it was definitely an area that the father was experienced in, and the son had no experience. He was innocent and not realizing the classic sibling rivalry, but in this case, extreme toxic version. But he was right. But even in him giving him his advice, and he is not only his father and has so many, possibly decades of experience more than him, but also he's a prophet, right? So from those top 25 prophets, that's Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam, the father of Joseph. But even in him giving advice that was absolutely on point and in a very serious matter, because it was about almost like life and death, he doesn't say your brothers are going to try to kill you, but he says, be really careful of your brothers. And he knows that his brothers are capable of evil, and he was right. But even then, he said it in a very gentle, nice, and loving way in his giving advice. So, lots to unpack here. He addresses them with love and care. There's another lesson here. The fact that his brothers wanted to hurt him and wanted to at least get rid of him, but they ended up hurting him a lot. And of course, it was all according to God's plan. But that kind of hate that they had for him, among the lessons there is that a father or mother, parents, they are expected to put in their best effort. This is the kind of the Islamic perspective or a Islamic perspective. They're expected to put in the effort, and the Quran says in a number of different ways, "Inna sa'yakum sawfa yura." It is your effort that will be judged. God says your effort will be judged. It's not the results. So it is possible, and this is clear indication because one of the top prophets, one of the top examples of a father figure in the Quran is Jacob with 12 sons. He's like a role model, ideal father, and still he has 10 of his sons almost killing the 11th, like murdering. So it's an extreme example of siblings, bullying or going after each other. But it wasn't his fault, right? So the effort is in our hands. The results are not. So Yaqub was not at all to blame for the fact that he had his sons were doing this. So if you are going through a tough time, you have a son or daughter or so on, or a kid or a person that you're in charge of or care of, or a student in your classroom maybe that is quite problematic, or that is a little bit tougher to deal with than others, or you're struggling to connect to or to relate to, or that it isn't necessarily your fault, right? We as human beings, and of course you all know this, we don't have we can't control other people. In fact, the reality is we have to be honest with ourselves as human beings. We're not like in full control of ourselves as well, right? We struggle our best to make decisions and to do things right, but we don't have full control of our own realities. We're human, so to think that we can control or produce a certain outcome from someone else that we would like it's not realistic. So it's about the effort, not about the results. And God is showing us this very clearly in this case. Ideal father and absolutely horrible sons, at least in this part of the story. Right? Verse 20. Any questions, comments, or concerns at this point? We can have a Q&A at the end, but also I'll be curious to know if anybody wanted to say anything while I pull up the next verse. I'm flexible.
So we did have one question. Was there a moment earlier where any of the brothers speak? Is that? Yeah.
So I can't. I mean, it would be a lot longer than an hour if I went to every detail. But the brothers do speak, and yes, if you go Quran.com/12, or if you go and you find chapter number 12, you can read it and see it's in English and any other language. So you could read through the story, and we can always discuss. But they tell the father, like, yo, let us take our youngest brother or second youngest brother, let him come out and join us when we go play. You never trust us with him, because he realizes that they have some evil in their hearts, and they're jealous of him. But like, let us take him out to play, and they keep kind of imploring him and pleading with him and begging him to do so. And he wants to say no, but eventually he's like, come on, Dad, what's wrong with you? So he's like, all right, fine, take him, just take good care of him. And exactly what he expects happens is they were trying to hurt him. They threw him into a well, and if I'm not mistaken, this part of the story at least is not too uncommon. Is not too different from the biblical and the Old Testament version. I could be wrong, but they throw him into a well, and we'll get to it in a second. Some of the injustices he faces. But there's a conversation between at least twice or three times in the chapter that we hear the brothers speak. Once they tell their dad, let him come out with us. Then they come back 4 times actually. They come back and they tell him, they're like fake crying, crocodile tears, and then like they have like a shirt that has blood on it from like a lamb they slaughtered or something. So it's like it's fake. And then the father sees right through it, but what can he do? He's like, we tried our best to protect him, but the wolf came and, ate this shirt, it has blood on it, and it's like fake blood, and like they got rid of him. And then he just has to be like, God, I'm going to do my best to be patient. This is a tough test for me. And so on. He bears it very well, but he really can't do anything. And then years later, another time that they speak, the brothers, is years later, something happens, or he remembers his son. It says, 11th son. He remembers him and says, oh, I miss him, something along those lines. And the brothers are like, you old fool kind of thing. Like, are you crazy? Like, it's been years, like, get over it. So it shows you, like, not only what they did was so nasty, of 10 brothers getting up on their younger brother to throw him into a well where he could have gotten killed, but what ends up happening is he gets, basically enslaved and kidnapped and all that, but could have killed him. And they still years later are not really regretful in the slightest, at least at this point. So they're not regretful and they don't mourn and they don't feel bad, it doesn't seem. And they're willing to still be abusive towards their father and like get over it. Like, what's a big deal? Like, what's wrong with you? How can you still think about him? Like, you would expect like years later when it's brought, like they kind of look at each other like, dang, we messed up years ago, maybe we were younger and stuff, but they're still like completely defensive of it. That changes. But then the fourth time they speak in the story is that they at the very end, we'll get to it when we get there. But did I miss was there anything more specific? Those are the times that they spoke.
It was more just making sure we understood the context here. And then Jean, do you want to ask your question real quick?
Go ahead and ask. I've got some noise here.
Okay, no worries. So Jean says you describe Jacob as a wise man and also a prophet. Do you think he knew at this time that he was a prophet? Yeah,
I think after he had 12 kids, he's an adult. Yeah, the indication that, so Jacob is not from the prophets in the Quran that we know like a lot of detail about. So Joseph, we know a lot more. David and Solomon more. Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Adam, Noah. So Jacob from the 25, they're mentioned in the Quran, but like his isn't one we know like a lot of detail. Mainly it's about him being a father and like his sons. But we do know he's a prophet at this point because, and I kind of skipped over it because there's a lot of detail, but the context of him speaking, you know, my dear father, my dear son, he was telling about a dream he had, and he interpreted his dream, which we believe is one of the miracles that he had as a prophet. So yeah, he was a prophet at this point. There's plenty that I say that definitely could be wrong. I'm not a scholar of the faith. That's why I'm trying to stick to kind of more of a surface level. There are details that I could get wrong. So I encourage you to fact check it, but I'm 99% sure that he was a prophet at this point. And Joseph isn't yet, but he will be later on. Joseph is a prophet, son of a prophet, son of a grandson of a prophet, and great-grandson of a prophet. It's Abraham, he has Ishmael and Isaac, and then he has Jacob, and then Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has Joseph. And yeah.
No pressure. No pressure.
So any other questions, comments, concerns? We can go on to it because the themes shift. So this is a great time if you guys have anything to say. So far, so good? We're good? Okay. وشروه بثمن بخس دراهم معدودة وكانوا فيه من الزاهدين. So yeah, he's thrown to the well by his brothers. They take him out like, Dad, we want to take him out to play with us. And he's like, yo, be careful of him. And they knew that, you know, they had bad intentions, but they basically found a way to grab him, throw him into a well, come back to the dad. We didn't do it. We promised. We tried to defend him. The wolf ate him. All that, right? It's a lie. In that well, he calls out to his brothers one by one and stuff like they're not, you know, they just turn their backs and walk away. And he's just in there waiting. But what happens eventually is God saves him in an unlikely manner. So remember, like we're going through the plot and the climax and think of this as the greatest, God is saying the greatest story ever told. So it's, I guess, a challenge accepted, right? Or it's an open challenge. But he's thrown into a well, which could have gone really badly, but he's saved by these people. They're going in their well. They're trying to get their water. They're passing by. This is like, you know, caravans going through from north and south, going to like Syria, going to Yemen, they pass by and they what comes out of what they expect is water, is like a little boy sitting there holding onto the rope, something along those lines. And so he's saved. It's a group of people, but they're like, hey, we can make a few bucks off of him, right? So they did not see much value in him. Besides like, oh, we can sell him into slavery and make a few bucks. And they're like, cool. It's like, we got water plus a few dollars. Not realizing that this is one of the greatest people to have ever lived. This is one of the greatest human beings ever, and one of the top 5 prophets. But maybe that is the nature of slavery. He was completely dehumanized and seen as nothing more than a few dollars. I mean, of course, there's a lot more to be said, but this is the first or second, I guess, second of many injustices that he'll face in his life. But yeah, he's kidnapped because it's a whole, you know, tribe or a whole company of people. It's a whole group that are traveling, passerbys, and they kidnap him. They force him to basically accompany them until they got to the city, until they got to Egypt, go to, you know, kind of the public square type thing, and they sell him into slavery. So you saved, but, you know, enslaved. They undervalued him, they dehumanized him, sold him, tried to sell him for a few dollars. And then there's another plot twist that out of all the possible people that could have, you know, bought him, not that we're, you know, for the buying or selling of any person, but this is what happens. It was a slave society. So people were enslaved, still human, but enslaved. Slavery does not, you know, of course, fully define the person, or does not define them at all, actually. But out of all the people that could have, quote unquote, purchased him or could have, you know, was in fact someone from the very, very, very upper part of that society. So societies generally follow like a pyramid structure. There's less people at the top, you know, money and power and so on. And it was Egypt. It was a pharaoh or a king type leader, and his possibly, I think, his right hand man, or, you know, at least one of his close advisors, someone very high up on the in the power pyramid, takes him in. And it turns out, again, generally throughout human history, at least that's the Quranic version of power, is generally throughout human history, Muslim history and human history, the default is that leaders generally, to some extent or another, will abuse their power, will be, power over everything else, money over everything else, maintain my chair, my throne by any means necessary, things like that, which is of course very un-Islamic. But even Muslim leaders throughout history, with exceptions that every once in a while there's a leader that at least tries to be a person of the people. That's the Quranic narrative on power and leadership, obviously oversimplified. But it happened to be that it was, again, another plot twist. This leader was, to the best of his abilities, was kind and generous and merciful and cared about people and wasn't trying to necessarily hurt him. So he saw the boy and he saw a completely different. So they said like, oh, a few bucks. He saw a boy and he's like, okay, young man. He seems like, or young, a preteen, teen. And they're like, maybe he'll be useful to us. We'll take him. He'll be our servant, right? So he didn't be like, all right, put him into a chain to make sure he never escapes and let's whip him every day and every night, right? He's like, he'll work for us. So maybe closer to employment, maybe. Hopefully that doesn't offend anyone. I'm just trying to, it's hard sometimes. It's called anachronism. It's hard to like take some things of the past, a different time, place, and civilization to try to make any type of, to make analogies. But it did seem, the Quranic story is that he was definitely better than probably a lot of the other, powerful people of his time. So he took him in. He said, we'll treat him well. We'll take care of him. He'll serve us. He'll be good for us. Who knows? Maybe they didn't have kids and he saw him as like, he can adopt him as the son, and that could be stretching it. I don't know, right? But we do know that he generally had a good heart from the Quranic story, and that his wife though wasn't exactly the same. She at around like 14 years old, so on, so as a teenager, Joseph was known for his good looks, and he's a young man. And the wife of this Aziz was like advisor, minister. He's like the minister, so he's not the leader, he's the minister. The wife of the minister tries to seduce him, right? She closes the doors, she locks him in, and he's there working in the house. He's like a domestic worker, working for them, working for the family. So she closes him and traps him in a room, and she is his boss, and she is his, or quote unquote, his master, and so he has to obey her. It's a slave society, but she's like, come here, right? And he understands the implications, and she had locked the door and everything, so he felt stuck. And of course, in his mind, he's thinking like, there's no way I'm going to do what she wants me to do. Even if he knows like the alternative could be imprisonment, death, etc. You can't disobey her. She's like a queen in that society. But he knows that this is something that's completely unacceptable morally. And so he does his best to run away. And she grabs onto his shirt, tears the shirt. To fast forward, basically, eventually, people open the door, her husband is there and others, and they see that she had like snatched, like she has like ripped off parts of his shirt. So she can tell that he was running away. And that he was running away and she's grabbing him, versus she tries to accuse him of, he was trying to, make moves on her. He was trying to, grab her. He was trying to assault her or rape her or so on. But the evidence was like on the contrary. But of course, she has the power. She abuses that power, and she's like, put him in prison. And I don't know the details of exactly why the husband wasn't able to prevent that. But regardless, he ends up in prison. That's how the story goes. So injustice after injustice, right? Plot twist after plot twist. He's imprisoned, completely innocent, and hadn't done anything to deserve that. There is a theme throughout the Quran of many of the prophets generally being harassed, assaulted, ridiculed, mocked, made fun of by their people. If not probably every single prophet, as far as I know, I believe the stories of every prophet included at least verbal insults. Some of them though were tortured and abused physically by the people. I don't know if all of them, but definitely a lot of them. And some even were killed by their own people. So it's kind of part of the quote unquote hero's journey. It's part of the prophetic struggle. And as people in our faith, we look up to the prophets as being the best. We want to be like them. That like that's part of life. To strive and struggle, you be tested. And Abraham is an excellent example of that. That he went through trial after trial and he came out on top. So I believe he was one of the top 5 greatest of all the prophets. But that's Joseph's great grandfather. Joseph also goes through trial and tribulation after trial and tribulation. He stays firm. He stays patient. I can only imagine. I'm not going to comment on mental health. Is another theme definitely in this chapter and in the Quran. And I know it's very something that's on a lot of people's minds these days. It's always been a thing. I mean, we're mind, body, and soul. But mental health has become increasingly part of our culture and pop culture, especially on social media. The last few years, a subject that I haven't studied yet as much as I would like to. So hopefully in the future, maybe I can speak more about this story and other stories from that perspective. But you can just imagine being wrongfully imprisoned. An interesting side point. One of the most famous cases in American history, in U.S. history, of wrongful imprisonment, because unfortunately, I was born in the U.S., where I was born in Texas. I believe it's the best state, second best state in America after Nebraska, the best state in the best country in the world. I'm very proud and blessed to be American, and I don't see no contradiction between being Muslim and American, although that's an, ongoing debate. And I grew up where the whole world and everyone had or a lot of people had seen that as like a clash in terms of identities. I never saw that, but very blessed and very proud to be American. And at the same time, I believe that it's healthy to be also very critical of a lot of our social and political policies and realities, and especially historically. present and historically. But unfortunately, U.S. history is full of cases of wrongful imprisonment, and it's not even really necessarily political. It's not necessarily left or right, because for a lot of the cases, the evidence is clearly there, DNA testing and so on, or people, coming out decades later. Emmett Till is one of the most famous cases in U.S. history of, it wasn't wrongful imprisonment, but a wrongful accusation, and Joseph is wrongfully accused. But an interesting point is that one of the most, if not the most famous cases of wrongful imprisonment in U.S. history, at least that I know of, was in the 90s. So I didn't, I wasn't aware at that time. I was born in the 90s, but I found out, a number of years ago, was the Central Park 5, right? So some of you might remember it, because I'm pretty sure it made news around the country. And about a year ago or so, or maybe 2 years ago, Netflix came out with a series called, what was a mini series? It's kind of like a movie, basically. A movie called When They See Us, about the Central Park 5 tour. For anyone that hasn't heard the story, but you can Google it. But essentially, it's a number of young African-American men. Maybe one of them was Latino, I forget, but predominantly African-American and people of color, boys and teens of color. And they were in New York City, and they were wrongfully accused of raping a white woman, and they're people of color, and they were completely innocent. From what I understood, they didn't even necessarily understand what rape was. They were kind of too young, but they're accused of that, kind of coerced into saying, yes, I did it, and then like, no, well, we never did it, but we were forced to say it, and then years later they come out of prison. But long story short, I do recommend that Netflix show. I think they did a decent job, and I wasn't familiar with the story beforehand, so that was my reference. But one of those boys was named Yusuf. Was named Joseph, and I met him. That's Yusuf Salam. You can Google it, Dr. Yusuf Salam. He has a decent social media presence, very decent actually. So on Instagram and his own website, and on Instagram, at least I'm familiar with that. He probably is on Facebook as well. Has a decent following, and he's regular on there, like lots of content. I recommend it. I actually was fortunate to meet him because I went to a rally in Atlanta. This was like 2 years ago, something. It was during COVID, fall 2022. So that's basically exactly like 2 years ago. It was a rally for H. Rap Brown, aka Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who's wrongfully imprisoned for over 20 years now. He was like possibly the top, if not the top Imam of America. So the Muslim community looked up to him as an Imam, as a leader nationally and globally. And he was wrongfully imprisoned. And it's not really the point to talk about that. But the interesting thing is, there's a rally for him and his wife and son. Interesting, are both civil rights attorneys. But there's a rally for him in Atlanta. T.I. was there, Killer Mike was there, a number of rappers and celebrities were there. That was interesting. But Dr. Yusuf Salam was there as well. And he spoke about it, and I interviewed him. And if anyone's interested, you can always message me or email me, and I can show you the interview. It's on my Instagram. But I asked him, one of the questions I asked him in the interview, I was like, so I kind of was assuming, great lesson, never to assume. But I assumed because I thought, I know this story. I've heard this many times, and I'm very familiar with like the story of like different converts in America, and like people that are African American, people that are imprisoned, the rate of people converting into Islam in prison, which is a very high stat. Again, I've been in the community my whole life, so I thought I'd heard all the stories. I knew all the trends. I made an assumption I was completely wrong. But I was like, so when you were wrongfully imprisoned, you were researching religions and you found Islam, and then you changed your name to Yusuf because you knew the story in the Quran of Yusuf was a young boy wrongfully imprisoned. So you named yourself Yusuf. That's what happened, right? And he's like, no, you don't understand. I was Muslim before I went in there. I believe he's the only one from the 5. His family was Muslim. He said, I was Muslim and my name was Yusuf. So then I was like, and he's like, yep, I know. I'm like, you're telling me that one of the most famous cases in US history of young boys being wrongfully imprisoned, your name was Yusuf, and that's like the story in the Quran of wrongful imprisonment as well. He's like, I know, it's crazy. I'm like, unbelievable. Anyways, just a tangent, but I met him. He's a great guy. Unfortunate trend in the US, but wrongful imprisonment is definitely relevant. So he's in prison, and I guess you have a number of choices. I can't speak from experience, but you have a number of choices of how you want to operate in prison, how you want to move, how you want to act, how you want to talk, how you want to walk, how you want to spend your time. And we don't obviously have the details of the years. I don't know, I forgot. It was like, let's say like 10 years he was in prison wrongfully, maybe more. We don't know the details of how he spent every day. Like, we don't have his journal, Yusuf, but we know at least a couple of things. There's others with him in that cell or neighboring cells. There's a number of people in there, so we know a little bit about their conversations, which does tell us a lot about his character and manners. Among the things he did, and they were older than him, he's a young guy, so they're like asking him questions and trying to figure out what he's about. And I can only imagine they're probably bored and lonely and so on. But he listens to what they have to say. He's super polite and respectful towards them. I mean, he's wrongfully in prison. So if someone was to misbehave and act out and be rude and lash, I'm not gonna be the one to judge them. But super polite and respectful. He listens to them. He tries to help them in whatever he can. He tells them about God and about purpose and about life and about faith and all that, which shows us that at a young age he had that sense of purpose. Of course, that's why he was made a prophet. They say, again, we don't have so much detail, but we do know that in the conversation at some point, I think it's like 2 other men and him are talking, and they say, from what we can see of you, you seem to be like on point. You're an excellent person. You have excellent character. You have excellent manners. We're honored to know you. We're lucky to know you. So it does tell us something. They ask him for advice on things, although we can assume that they're older than him. They ask him for advice. They ask him for help. Pray for us. Think about us. We had this dream. Can you interpret it for us and stuff? And he would like answer the questions. And when he didn't know, he would say like, "Oh, I only know what God tells me. We have to wait for revelation or so on. But I don't know this, or that's knowledge that God hasn't given me." Super humble. And of course, again, one of the greatest people to have ever lived. And he's super humble. And he's young. And he has purpose. And he's there to help people. He's wrongfully imprisoned. Like the layers and the levels, like it's mind-boggling, to be honest. But he's there for them. And plot twist after plot twist. One of them, we find out, I'm skipping details, of course. One of them, we find out that one of them is going to make it out of prison, make it a joke, because sometimes a king, pharaoh, leader, even a president, somebody powerful, a governor, puts you in prison. There's always a chance that you're going to be in there for life, even if you are innocent. Unfortunately, it happens too often. But in this case, we found out that he's actually getting out. So it's cause of huge celebration. So the others tell him, like, don't forget us. If you get an opportunity to mention us to the king or mention us and try to help us, like, don't forget us. He says, I promise. But he forgets them for whatever reason. Maybe he forgets them, right? So Joseph is in there for a number of more years. But God finds a way God planned a way for him to get out. And it was about this dream, about the concept of dream interpretation, which I didn't want to focus on specifically because I didn't feel that it's among the themes that maybe is relevant to at least the things that are on my mind today. But basically one of the miracles is that he can interpret dreams. So that ends up, so his talent, quote unquote, although it's God's knowledge and God's power and God's ability, God's gift to him, but his talent, you can say, got him out of prison because the king had a dream, and essentially it was that there's a drought coming. Essentially, you have to prepare for it, but he didn't know how to interpret it. He asked people around him, and they're like, "Oh, well." One of the servant who's there serving the king remembered that when he was in prison, this guy interpreted dreams for him. So he remembered him. It's been years later, probably. They bring him out. He interprets the dream correctly, and so then that he gets out. Another plot twist. He comes out of prison. You would expect that, all right, he'll go back to being that servant, slave, enslaved, or whatever kind of lower, bottom of the pyramid type status which he was in before he was imprisoned, or lower, or you wouldn't expect him to kind of move up in rank after coming out of prison, right? And they say you're a felon for life, right? People shun people that have, again, not everyone, I'm not trying to generalize, but people, there's plenty of people that will look down on someone that's had a record, that's been in prison. In addition to being, so he was enslaved and he was imprisoned. But in this case, another plot twist is that the king makes him his advisor. Joseph actually says, he interpreted the dream and he's like, wow. And then he's like, make me the head of, what's the current, like, I don't know, in the US, what's the title, but basically he's the head of, like, he's the head of finance. He's the minister of economics. What's up?
Like a secretary of something?
Minister of economics. I don't know. I'll think about it. If it comes to me later on, I'll let you know. But basically, he manages the money, which is, people could argue that's the most powerful position in a society. If not, he's probably like second or third or so on to the leader, to the king, or to the pharaoh. But it's huge. And at this point, we can assume he's probably still young. Maybe he got thrown into the well and enslaved at, let's say, 10. And then, some years later, he's like 12, 13, 14. The wife seduces him and he's in prison, and let's say he's there for 10 years. Let's say he's 25, 30, he comes out. He's young, but now he's like almost the head of the country. He's earned it. There's a lot of lessons there as well about service, being, service and leadership.
Can I pause here for just a second real quick? Just to make sure that we have any opportunities for questions. Particularly because I think and you emphasize this, and I didn't really think about it as much, but especially about wrongful accusation and maybe even just kind of how much credit to give someone who is imprisoned, right? Like I want to see if anyone else has any questions, but one question that came to my mind was it sounded like the assumption was most people in the prison, when you were talking about, don't forget us here, right? And the guy who was about to go free, and they were telling him to, don't forget us, please advocate for us. It sounds to me like there's an implication that those who are in prison most of the time shouldn't be there, almost. Ooh. Or am I reading too much into that? Because it seems like it was wrong for him to forget them, right? At least that's how I hear it when you say it.
It's a human error. He didn't mean to. So he clearly, because when he remembered him, as soon as he remembered him, because the king was like, I had this dream. He's like, oh my God, I forgot the guy with it. So it didn't seem like it was intentional at all. It seems like he made a human error, and he probably felt bad about it. So I don't know. maybe the fact that he was in prison for maybe 20, we don't know, right? Maybe he was there from 20 to 50, and he comes out at 50 and he's just like so looking around and like, oh my God, it's a different world, and like I want to make up my life, and he completely forgot. Like, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. It's interesting you said, so yeah, maybe the majority of people in prison are actually innocent or not, or maybe innocent / they got a sentence that is unjust. That gets quite political, which I don't have a problem speaking about politics, but I also don't have all the answers. And criminal justice reform in the US is an ongoing discussion. I have some opinions, but mostly it's something I need to research more. I think there are people that have that view. So I was actually at Boys Town just, I guess now it's been 2 weeks. I was there last week and the week before. There are neighbors that are literally down the street from us, and they do have they have quite different views on how to discipline children, how to basically what is or isn't a problematic or troubled child, and how to deal with it, and how people reform their lives, they see potential in people that others don't see. Boys that end up there, obviously they come from many different walks of life and many different stories. I mean, every single one of them has a story, but I know that at least some percentage of them, they would have gone to juvie/prison/jail, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I understood. So they definitely, and early on when the movement started, and now it's its own city basically, but the movement started, when the organization started, the group started, the father, the Catholic father who started it, was criticized and ridiculed for basically accepting young boys who society had seen as like, if their own parents don't want them, or their own communities don't want them, or they're seen as like the troublemakers in their town or their city, or they're one step away from going to jail, or they're part of a gang or whatever, taking them all in together and trying to make something like out of it, they thought he was crazy. So I don't know if I have my mind completely made up, but I think when I heard that, I think that's probably a lot closer to my views. Maybe then, like, I come from Texas, because also in the US we have a number of different cultures, a number of different legal systems, and a number of different social and political cultures. But Texas is definitely one of the states that's big on putting people in prison. I mean, our faith as Muslims is not an easy one. There's levels to this, because our faith is very strict on law and order as Muslims. Like, in addition to all the laws of a country and land, etc., we also have so many of our own personal and family and laws. So we follow. We're like, Muslims and Jews are similar in this. That we have, laws basically dictate our lives. We're big on law. But the idea that people are making money off of throwing people in prison, right? Private prisons. I think it's among the injustices in our times. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Alhamdulillah for everything. Anyone had questions, comments, concerns? What do you all think? The story goes that he becomes the head of the ministry. He helps that society through their drought and through everything through that country, because he's able to manage the money and the food, and tell them when to grow their food, when to like save it, when to spend it, he has that talent, he has the interest, he has the care and concern for people, but also he's a prophet and God speaks to him and reveals to him. So he's able to do that position justice. And eventually the story goes that the brothers, at some point, there's a drought, they come to the capital, they come to Egypt and so on, and they come to get their rations and so on, and they, again, a lot of details, it's a beautiful story, but they eventually find out that that's their brother. He went from, they thought they had got rid of him, they thought they had gotten rid of him by throwing him into a well. Now he's like, he's the president, basically, or close, or vice president or secretary, right? And they're like, they actually apologize at this point. It's decades later. They're like, we're sorry, we messed up. And he's like, that's a thing. He's like, don't even worry about it. He didn't be like, you apologize? You sure? All right, I'll think about it. Which you definitely can do. And you have the right not to forget. Islamically, this is I can't say, again, I'm not speaking on, it's a good point Jeremy made at the beginning. I'm not speaking on behalf of all Muslims, but just my understanding of our faith, because from a number of verses, is that you do have the right to, quote unquote, an eye for an eye. Well, that phrase is also used in many different contexts, but you have the right to like seek justice, and you have the right not to forgive if someone takes your right. You have that right, or to ask for it back, or etc. But God says that mercy and forgiveness is better. So, but he gives us an excellent example. I mean, he is a prophet, from the best prophet, an excellent example of forgiveness, because what they did to him was, decades of his life, he's being tortured, abused, and all that, wrongfully imprisoned, and all that as a result of what they did, and enslaved, and kept away from his family, and his dad is crying and all that, and his parents are, miss him, and etc. But he says, don't even worry about it. It was nothing. Nothing happened. So it's levels of forgiveness. If he had said, like, do you guys know what you did to me? You guys know what I've been through? You have no, let me tell you. And he tells them the whole story. Then he says, you know what? Fine, I forgive you. Or let me think about it. And comes the next day after. That's still forgiveness. But he's like, don't even worry. As soon as he said forgive it, he didn't even let them finish. Like, yo, we messed up. He's like, nothing happened. Highest level of forgiveness, as far as I mean, could be mistaken, but definitely a high level of forgiveness. That's another theme. But that's basically the end of the story. In a nutshell. So yeah, questions, comments, concerns. Yeah. He's reunited with his family in Egypt, where he's a prophet and a minister, and it's a beautiful ending. But the plot twists and the trials and
And also, anyone here from any scriptural version of this story that you've heard or read. Are there any differences or similarities that are worth kind of bringing up to talk about? Oh, I do see.
You're free to share, different versions as well.
No, Noreen has raised her hand.
Yeah, I would. Assalamu alaikum. I am familiar with the story of Joseph, and I was wondering if you could comment on the symbol or the symbolic representation of the shirt in the story, because the shirt appears at least twice, if not more. So once when he's thrown in the well and the brothers bring the bloodied shirt to the father, and then the second time when he is alleged to have had some relations with the wife of the treasurer or the king or whoever it was. And I think the third time is at the end of the story when Joseph asks them to bring the shirt, or the father, or something like that. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
100%. Thank you so much for the question. I have to be completely honest. I did not think about it, and I don't believe I know the answer off the top of my head. Can you share with us if you possibly know the answer? I apologize if I'm letting you down, but I don't know. Like, it's not something I thought about.
I forget. This is a story that I studied when I was at uni, and I remember vividly that the shirt sort of had a meaning or an interpretation, which is not just the physical shirt, but it becomes a symbol of truth and lies. And
I was thinking innocence, because like he's innocent, like it's the wolf. No, it's a lie. And you said truth and
falsehood. And falsehood, yeah.
I was thinking right before you said truth, I was thinking innocence, but those are related. Truth and falsehood. The shirt, yeah, the truth. The shirt was a ploy. Was a what's the word? Was a ploy. Was a scam. Was a lie. Was part of the lie that they told their father. Although that same shirt, like you mentioned, at the end of the story comes back when he says, "Take my shirt." Not the same shirt, but yes, it's a shirt. Take his shirt, and he said, his dad. The story goes that his dad, Yaqub, the prophet, had gone blind from years of crying over his son. He loved his son. Years of crying, and we went blind, something to that effect. And Joseph's shirt, which he smelled and reminded him of his son, years later, and something along the lines of, someone can search it, but they put it over his face so he could see again, which of course is a miracle from God, because obviously it's not the shirt itself, but it's a symbol of Joseph's innocence. And then she grabs him, and then that is proof that everyone in the room and everyone that saw that, and I don't know if it did spread actually in society. It did get out, and it spread that she was, oh my God, it's her own boy, and she's like taking advantage of him, and then she's like, oh, what would you have done, etc., etc. She tried to show them up, but the shirt was clear proof to anyone that saw that in her hands was that she was the one who was guilty. But the power struggle, the power difference, it's not even close. Joseph wasn't even allowed, from what we know the story, he wasn't even allowed to speak on his own behalf and say, well, she did this. I don't know if she spoke. I don't know if he spoke, but even if he did, we know how it went. He ended up going to prison because but the shirt represents innocence, truth, falsehood, evidence. It's a great question. I never really thought about the shirt itself. The shirt represents identity, in a sense. The shirt represents, I have to think more about it. And I appreciate the question. I mean, something I can think about.
I have another question. The stories from the Quran and other scriptures, I, as a young person, have great memories of my mom telling me these stories. But now I find that when I tell these stories to my children, there's a lot of trauma in these stories, that the brother was abandoned by so how do we manage this storytelling and lesson learning aspect and balance that with not causing trauma to the children, especially the story of Abraham, where he's commanded to sacrifice his son? This is something that I'm quite troubled with. I mean, my children are teenagers now, so I can have a more adult conversation with them. But as children, I found it quite difficult to share the stories.
It's a fair point. As I've been, I remember as early as 7 years old, like first grade, I went to a private Islamic school for some time in Austin, Texas. I remember like the stories of the prophets was probably the primary way which we were learning Islamic studies or religious studies, and I remember loving them straight off the bat. As soon as I heard that first part, like probably 7 years old, if not earlier, as soon as I heard stories of any of the prophets, I was hooked right away. I love it. I love those stories, and I've been sharing them probably ever since. But in the last number of years, I've through Zoom, actually, coincidentally, I taught some during COVID. I was doing the prophet stories with like kids of different ages around Houston, around the US as well. I love it, and I did. So I had thought about that like a number of times I get to a point in the story, I'm like, okay, so these guys are 5, 6, 7 in this Zoom class. These guys are 10, 11, 12, and I've taught to teenagers and college students and so on, mentioning the stories of the prophets. So I try my best to like kind of tailor it to their level and to focus on the things that I believe that they can grasp, and then maybe leave out the things that they can't. But every once in a while, I'm super surprised. I'm sorry if I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer, but I'm surprised every once in a while where I mention something and then kind of gloss over something else, or kind of just and then a 10-year-old would say something that I was like, wow. So they're really thinking. Maybe they can understand more than I expected. Maybe they've seen and heard a lot more than I've expected. Some of them are on social media and on the internet from 5 till 10, so they've probably seen and heard a lot more than I did at 10. But I don't know if I have the answer. It's a very very fair question. The stories of the prophets are meant for all ages. They definitely, absolutely have adult themes, and we see this in Yusuf's story. We see that in every story. They definitely have Moses, punching someone and not intending to, but ended up murdering him. There's definitely adult themes. But I do believe like the answer wouldn't be to not share the stories of the prophets, because these are kids and there's adult themes, because there's definitely things that they can relate to and things they can learn from. The Islamic perspective is that these are the greatest people to have ever lived. So if you're going to be following, if you picked up the iPad or the phone or the laptop or the computer of the average 10, 12, 15, 17-year-old today, so that's like Generation Z, which are, I've had a good number of years of experience with that generation now, tutoring and mentoring and being youth director for like 10 years or so. You'd be shocked by some of the people that pops up for them on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok and so on. So if that's fair to add that into the context of answering the question, I would say it's probably a lot better to talk about, first of all, nonfiction stories versus fiction. And then, or not everything on the internet is fiction, but some of it is. And then role models that were people that strive to have strived morally to be the best, and that God tells us are the best, versus people that we can make a video of anything these days, and on Twitter and other public open platforms where you could be on there as young as you could be any age. You can lie that you're 12 or 13, but you could definitely be even younger. They have full on nudity, and there's content on drugs and alcohol. There's content around nudity, prostitution, pornography. There's content about anything and everything that I think anybody could consider moral and immoral. We might disagree on some of this, right? I know that alcohol isn't forbidden in other faiths and so on, but the point is, I think a lot of parents have a common understanding of what they would like their kids to see, and definitely social media has allowed things that I think a lot of parents would not like. So telling them the stories of the prophets as a counter, because human beings, again, going back to the idea, it's our nature that we want stories, we want examples, we want people. There's I could be wrong with this, but my understanding is like minority of society will always be those who like books will be their primary method of learning and exploring the world. Books, I could be wrong that maybe it's not the minority, but that's how I feel. I feel like it's the minority, and majority, they want to follow a person. So it could be through social media these days, but it could be like whoever's on the news or politics, or some leader or someone that their parents tell them stories about, or movies and shows. But people versus books, and it could be a combination. But if the alternative is some of these people that I've seen on social media, I study social media and I'm on there for a lot. I probably spend way more time on there than I should. But I've been on there since like YouTube came out when I was 12 years old. I've been on YouTube pretty much every day since. I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. When I tell these kids stories of the prophets, I rarely feel guilty about sharing things that are that I think could, hopefully not have a bad impact. Yeah, I don't know if I have the answer. I do think that people have to look up to certain people. Maybe tailoring the message based on the age, but not leaving out the stories of the prophets. You have to give alternatives. Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and forgive me if I was all over the place. I'm reading some of you guys' comments. As brothers, one of the brothers is different from the rest. Maybe the oldest one speaks out on behalf of 10 of them. The 10 brothers, one speaks out, and I don't know if I know their names, but as a wise man, as a prophet, I was a full brother Benjamin, who was the youngest. Yeah, we didn't speak about him because it's a lot of details, but our half brothers. Okay, Yusuf speaks. Jeremy, thanks so much for sharing. That's Dr. Yusuf Salam. Is that his website? Yusuf speaks. That sounds right. His Instagram page is also pretty impressive. Kentor Alexander. Hi, Wendy. How are you, Ms. Goldberg? Kentor Alexander. What does this shirt represent from Jewish interpretation? Great question. In the Hebrew version, the same word used to describe Joseph's coat, ketonet pasim, is also used one other time in the Hebrew scriptures to describe a garment worn by Tamar, daughter of King David, who was raped by her brother Absalom. I had no idea, but I love learning new things. Yeah, I really look forward to. I mean, I'm relatively new here. It's probably week number 8 now. I really look forward to opportunities to go to the temple and the church more often for study of different scriptures and so on. I want to learn as much as possible as I can about the Bible and the Old Testament. I think discussing generational trauma is very relevant. We should talk more about this. I agree. I just feel like it's something I'm aware of the fact that mental health is a huge, very important topic. I haven't really given that many, like, if any, khutbahs, like Friday sermons or like Friday night lectures, or like when I visit MSAs or when I speak to the youth. I've mentioned the word a few times. I've rarely given a talk. We're talking about mental health because I know, and I've met people that are experts in the area and they spent decades studying it. And I haven't, and I hope to, but I haven't yet. I spent more time on like theological things and historical things. And I want to give the topic justice, but mental health is huge. And you guys can definitely educate me on the topic. Actually, the master's program that I'm currently part of, there are different courses that are coming up on counseling and therapy and mental health and so on. I just haven't gotten there yet. I think discussing generational trauma. Interesting. The common denominator with the shirt seems to be victimhood. I like that. That's what I was thinking. Innocence. Definitely seems to be a connection there, even sexual victimhood. Yeah. I don't know if Joseph wasn't technically a sexual sex slave. Like, it wasn't human trafficking. And it was, I never thought of it that way. It was human trafficking, that they picked him up from the well and they took him to another place. That's human trafficking. Then he was sold, and he wasn't sold as a sex slave. He wasn't sold as like for that purpose, as far as I know. But maybe the father saw something and the mother saw something else, or the husband saw something and the wife saw something else. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot more. There's definitely layers to unpack here. But
Imam.
Yeah.
In the Torah version of Joseph's enslavement, he is sexually harassed by Potiphar's wife, and his rejection of her is what lands him in prison. So there's definitely is a sexual aspect, whether it's he said, she said, or whether it was concluded in the Torah's version of that same story.
Thank you, Kancha. Big difference in Judaism is that the patriarchs are revered, but not for perfection. I see the beauty in their imperfection. Okay. Teaching that we can learn from, yeah. So the patriarchs, feel free to please let me know.
So like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being the 3 patriarchs of Judaism, are not considered to be perfect prophets. In fact, I would say that Jacob is an example of pretty poor parenting, not an example of an excellent father. We see in the Torah story that he elevates Joseph and helps to cause some of the sibling rivalry by giving Joseph a special coat, a special shirt, and giving him special attention that he does not give to the children of his less loved wives. And that is an example of pretty poor parenting from a modern perspective, and causes a lot of this trauma, towards Joseph from his siblings. So to me, not putting Jacob in a perfect box helps me to teach my children and the youth of the temple, both about bad parenting, about what maybe could have happened instead, if only, and a little bit also about to be able to say, like, to make them human, right? We're not only learning about perfect people that we can never be like, we're learning about people who were very imperfect and in spite of their imperfections are still in relationship with God and still have something to teach us these thousands of years later. So that helps me to teach it without it causing continuous trauma, I think. More humanity.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm learning a lot from you, by the way, Cancer. I listen to every word you say when you're singing and when you're praying at the temple, and I've been there a number of times and stuff. I'm paying close attention, reading out whenever I have the opportunity, reading out what you're saying, and also listening to it and trying to best understand it. A lot of it is stuff that I can relate to in themes, and some of it is new stuff that I've Googled sometimes and looked up certain words or certain figures. But I appreciate you very much. But if I may say this, the Islamic view on prophets is not that they're perfect, because we believe only God is perfect. The creator of the universe is perfect. And I say he, but we don't believe he's a male or female. He's not animal, human, plant, nothing like his creation outside the universe, or just he as a pronoun, but he's not, not a male, then he would definitely not be perfect, because men are absolutely not perfect. But God is perfect, we believe in the Islamic tradition, but no one or nothing else is perfect, including the prophets. But if a Muslim says they're perfect, they generally mean, not to speak on behalf of all Muslims, we mean as in like they're the best example that we have of humans. But humans in their nature are, of course, flawed. They make mistakes, they sin, they etc. So we don't believe the prophets are perfect. Only God is perfect. Even Muhammad, peace be upon him, or our prophet, like they're all our prophets, but he's like the prophet that founded at least this chapter of our story in Islam. He told people, like, people would praise him in ways that he felt were not appropriate, like basically talking about him like he's perfect. And he said, no, you can't say that, you can't say that, or that's okay. You can say, I'm the last final man. Okay, you can't say that we have a prophet amongst us that can tell the future and like we're never gonna go astray because we're fallen. He's like, yo, that you guys they're like singing about him. He's like, oh, that's not appropriate. So we want to put people in their rightful places. But yes, we do have a different views on prophets, it seems. I've heard this from some of my evangelical friends in Texas. They said the prophets were people that had committed major sins, but God wants to show us that he can make the unworthy worthy. I can see that, but our view is different, that they actually were the best people of their societies. And when they're prophets, it's a test for everyone else if they're going to follow them or not. But of course, we can agree to disagree. And I appreciate you for making the comments. There was something else, and I don't know if I remember it. We were talking about Jacob and the Prophet Muhammad said that you can't give one of your kids something and not give to another. Like, you can't be unfair in your treatment to them. And it happened in front of them that a man came. The context for him giving us that teaching or that advice was that a man came to him and says, I want you to. I mean, the Prophet couldn't read and write, so he didn't sign, but it's like the equivalent of us saying, I want you to sign something. Basically, I want you to witness that I gave this, it's one of my sons, I gave him I gave him a car. He turned 16, I gave him a car. Let's use an analogy. And he's like, did you give your other son a car? He said, no, I didn't. He says, yeah, this is not it's not appropriate. I can look more into the context, but you're supposed to be even with your kids. So if Jacob did that, it's a mistake according to the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad. The Quranic view was that he did not do that. But regardless, thank you so much for your contribution. You all are free to tell me when you agree and when you disagree and so on. I love it. I learned a lot of new things, so I have no problem with it. It seems to me that Joseph's story is about how to stand in contrast to corrupt systematic forces. I love it. Corey, this is great. Definitely the theme of social justice. So I feel like more confident speaking about social justice. I haven't even scratched the surface on understanding this. People who study this stuff. I know people that are alive that have been in the field of social justice, studying it and learning it and teaching it and being a part of the history for 50 plus years now. I met some of these people, and of course others have passed away or were murdered. But but I feel a little bit more confident speaking about that than like mental health, and they're both super important themes in our times. But just because I've put in at least some years and met some people and read some books and watched some videos on the topic versus mental health, I'm just scratching the surface. But I love this corrupt systemic forces. Yeah, actually, to add a little bit to this, I don't know how we are on time, but the one of the top scholars in Islamic history, it was about 700 years ago, which is exactly like between us and the Prophet. So this was like, it was like one of the peaks, human beings and civilizations and whatever word you want to, or empires or peoples generally go through ups and downs. That's kind of how I see it, and I could be wrong, but Muslim history has ups and downs. We're human beings. The one of the peaks in terms of knowledge and scholarship in universities and research and intellectual so on was about 700 years ago, and one of the top figures in our history. He had an interesting point to make, and he said that in the debate, which of course he didn't end the debate, this debate will always be there. It's there in our times today, Muslims and non-Muslims, it will always be there, about how to bring about change, inside the system versus outside, MLK versus Malcolm X, Mandela versus, Gandhi versus different forms of how to bring about change. And I'm going to say I have the answer to that, but the general debate of bringing different forms of different methods of bringing about change, and what's too much and what's allowed, and how effective is it to be inside the system versus outside, versus what system are you willing to be part of, and how do you compromise? When are you allowed to compromise? How about sticking to your principles? Again, these things are always going to be debated, but on that discussion, and Muslims have that as well, we are principles in our faith, but we're in a society where the majority aren't Muslim, or the government is corrupt, or whatever it is. Ibn Taymiyyah, who's again one of the top scholars on history, who was like a walking encyclopedia. He wrote encyclopedias and read probably an entire library. He said that in the story of Joseph, you have an example of which you are allowed to, and according to our faith, because God is giving us his story as an example, you're allowed to be inside a corrupt or oppressive or non-Muslim or all the above. Those aren't the same thing. Because you can have a just, not corrupt, non-Muslim system, and you can definitely have a Muslim unjust system. And that's not me saying this just because we're in a tri-faith or interfaith setting, but there's plenty of evidence in our faith to that point. But the point is, he says that this is evidence where you can be in that system and you can still be principled. I mean, Joseph was definitely principled and still do a lot of good. And you're not accountable for, not responsible for the fact that around you there could be all sorts of nonsense going on. There was a slave society, and probably I'm sure the rich were oppressing the poor, and there was only that. I mean, I'm sure there was race issues and gender issues and economic issues and all those things, which are obviously a lot bigger than just US history or modern, progressive. They're not just progressive values; they are objectively human themes through our history. But all that was going on, but he didn't have control or power over all that, and therefore he's not responsible for all that. But in his role, he killed it basically at his role. And so that's an example for us that you can bring about change within the system, and that God is not going to hold you to account for the things that you couldn't control, that you can be principled within an unjust system. So that's, again, the commentary of one scholar in our history. So we can take
Thank you very much, Abdul. We are at the end of our time. I really appreciate all the ideas that you brought forth here. I think there's a lot to unpack from our own like personal points of view, as well as kind of just community points of view, right? Thank you again. I do want to remind everybody, please fill out the survey. I'm going to link it again. We'll also send a follow-up email with the recording and the survey as well. So I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.